My name is Sarah Martinez, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would take jewelry from a dead woman's house. But here I am, 3 months later, wearing her emerald earrings to my divorce attorney's office, and I don't feel guilty about it. Not one bit. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't really about the jewelry. It's about respect, family, and what happens when you're treated like you're invisible for 8 years, only to discover that the one person who truly saw you is gone forever. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my phone rang. Denver was experiencing one of those perfect autumn days where the leaves on the maple trees lining our street had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and the Rocky Mountains stood majestically against a crystal-clear sky. I was in my small home office reviewing insurance claims for the company I work for when I saw my husband David's name on the caller ID. "Sarah, I need you to sit down." David's voice was shaky, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. David Martinez was many things: distant, work-obsessed, sometimes inconsiderate, but he was never shaky. "What's wrong?" I asked, minimizing the spreadsheet on my computer screen and giving him my full attention. "It's Grandma Elena. She passed away this morning." The words hit me like a physical blow. Elena Martinez had been the only member of David's family who had ever truly welcomed me into their fold, while his parents, Roberto and Carmen, had spent 8 years making it clear that I wasn't good enough for their precious son, and his sister Maria had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. Elena had treated me like the granddaughter she'd never had. "What happened?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Heart attack. Mom found her this morning when she went to check on her. She was in her garden, Sarah. She was watering her roses." I closed my eyes and could picture Elena perfectly. A woman of 78 who moved with more energy than people half her age, always with dirt under her fingernails from tending to her beloved garden. She had immigrated to the United States from Mexico when she was 22, worked 2 jobs to put her son Roberto through college, and never once complained about the sacrifices she'd made. "I'm so sorry, David. I know how much she meant to you. The funeral is on Friday. Mom's handling the arrangements." Of course, Carmen was handling the arrangements. Carmen Martinez had a way of taking control of every situation, especially when it meant she could exclude me from important decisions. In 8 years of marriage, I had learned that my opinions were rarely solicited and even more rarely valued by my in-laws. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Just be there for me, okay? This is really hard." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the mountains. Elena had been the bridge between me and David's family, the one who insisted I be included in holiday celebrations, who called me directly instead of just asking David to pass along messages, who remembered my birthday and actually cared about my job, my dreams, my feelings. I met Elena for the first time 8 years ago, shortly after David and I got engaged. We were at a family barbecue in the backyard of Roberto and Carmen's house in Aurora, a sprawling ranch-style home with a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I was nervous, desperately wanting to make a good impression on the family of the man I was going to marry. Carmen had introduced me to various relatives with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Roberto barely acknowledged my presence, focusing instead on the Broncos game playing on the outdoor television. I felt like an outsider looking in, watching this tight-knit family interact with inside jokes and shared memories that I would never be part of. That's when Elena approached me. She was shorter than I expected, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that sparkled with warmth and intelligence. "You must be Sarah," she said in accented English, taking my hands in both of hers. "David has told me so much about you. Welcome to our family, mija." The word mija, a term of endearment meaning my daughter, made my eyes well up with tears. No one in David's family had ever called me that before, or since. "Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. It's wonderful to meet you. Elena, please, we are family now." She spent the next hour showing me her garden, explaining the different types of roses she grew, sharing stories about David's childhood, and asking me genuine questions about my work as an insurance investigator. She was curious about everything: how I met David, what I thought about Denver after growing up in small-town Wyoming, whether I liked to cook, if I wanted children someday. "You have kind eyes," she told me as we sat on her favorite bench near the rose bushes. "David is lucky to have found you." Over the years, Elena became my ally in a family that often made me feel like an unwelcome guest. When Carmen would make comments about how I was too career-focused or how I didn't understand family traditions, Elena would quietly change the subject or find a way to redirect the conversation. When Roberto would ignore me entirely during family gatherings, Elena would make sure I was seated next to her at dinner and would include me in every conversation. She was the one who insisted on helping me plan our wedding, even though Carmen clearly wanted to handle everything herself. Elena and I spent countless Saturday afternoons looking at venues, tasting cakes, and choosing flowers. She shared stories about her own wedding to David's grandfather, a man who had died before I could meet him, but whom she described with such love that I felt like I knew him. "Marriage is not always easy, mija," she told me one afternoon as we sat in a bridal shop, waiting for me to try on dresses. "There will be times when you feel like strangers, times when you wonder why you chose each other. But if you remember to be kind, to listen with your heart, and to never stop fighting for each other, you can build something beautiful together." I treasured that advice, especially during the rough patches in my marriage to David. And there had been plenty of rough patches. David worked as a financial advisor for a large firm downtown, and his career had always taken priority over everything else: our relationship, our plans, our conversations about starting a family. He traveled frequently, worked late most nights, and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere. Elena noticed. She always noticed. "How are you doing, really?" she would ask during our monthly coffee dates, a tradition she had started and insisted on maintaining, much to Carmen's obvious displeasure. We would meet at a small cafe near her house, and Elena would order the same thing every time: black coffee and a piece of tres leche cake. I would usually get a latte and whatever pastry looked good that day, but what I really came for was the conversation. Elena was one of the few people in my life who asked how I was doing and actually waited for an honest answer. I could tell her about my frustrations with David's work schedule, my struggles with feeling accepted by his family, my fears about whether we were growing apart instead of together. She would listen without judgment, offer gentle advice when I asked for it, and always remind me that I deserved to be happy. "You are a strong woman, Sarah," she would say. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." The Wednesday after Elena's death, I took the day off work to help with funeral preparations. I drove to Roberto and Carmen's house, expecting to find the family coming together to honor Elena's memory. Instead, I walked into what felt like a business meeting. Carmen had taken over the dining room table, with printouts of flower arrangements, catering menus, and funeral home brochures spread across the surface. Maria was on her laptop, apparently coordinating with relatives flying in from out of state. Roberto was on the phone with someone, discussing financial arrangements. "Oh, Sarah," Carmen said when she noticed me standing in the doorway. "I didn't expect you today. I took the day off to help. What can I do?" Carmen exchanged a look with Maria that I recognized. It was the same look they shared whenever I offered to contribute to family events. It said, "Why is she here?" and "We don't actually need her help." "Everything is pretty much under control," Carmen replied. "We've got the flowers ordered, the church booked, the reception venue secured. Maria's handling the music, and Roberto's taking care of the cemetery arrangements. What about Elena's house? Does someone need to start going through her things?" Another look between mother and daughter. "We'll handle that after the funeral," Maria said, without looking up from her laptop. "It's family business. Family business." As if I hadn't been part of this family for 8 years. As if Elena hadn't treated me like her own granddaughter. As if I hadn't been the one to drive her to doctor's appointments when no one else was available. Or the one who called her every week just to check in. "Of course," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "Well, if you need anything, we'll let you know," Carmen said, already turning back to her flower arrangements. I drove home feeling hollow and confused. David was at work naturally, so I had no one to talk to about the strange dynamic I just experienced. I called my own mother in Wyoming, but she was dealing with her own family crisis and didn't have time to listen to me process my feelings about my in-laws. That evening, when David came home, I tried to talk to him about what had happened. "I went to your parents' house today to help with the funeral preparations," I began as we sat at our small kitchen table, picking at the Chinese takeout he'd brought home. "That was nice of you," he said, scrolling through emails on his phone while he ate. "David, can you put the phone down for a minute? I'm trying to talk to you about your grandmother's funeral." He looked up, somewhat annoyed at being interrupted. "Sorry, what about the funeral? Your family didn't want my help with anything. I felt like they were treating me like an outsider." "I'm sure that's not what they meant. Everyone's just stressed about the arrangements. It's not just today, David. It's been 8 years of this. Your mother and sister act like I don't belong in this family, and your father barely acknowledges that I exist." David put down his phone and rubbed his temples. "Sarah, please. I just lost my grandmother. Can we not do this right now?" "We never do this, David. Every time I try to talk to you about how your family treats me, you shut down the conversation. Because it's always something with you and my family. Maybe if you tried harder to fit in." "Tried harder?" I stood up from the table, anger flaring in my chest. "I've been trying for 8 years. I've shown up to every birthday party, every holiday, every family event, even when I knew I wasn't really wanted there. I've bitten my tongue when your mother makes comments about my career or my cooking, or the fact that we don't have children yet. I've pretended not to notice when your father ignores me completely. What exactly should I be trying harder at?" David looked uncomfortable, which was his standard response when confronted with difficult conversations about his family. "They're not that bad, Sarah. You're being overly sensitive." Overly sensitive. The phrase that had been used to dismiss my feelings countless times throughout our marriage. "The only person in your family who ever made me feel welcome was Elena," I said quietly. "And now she's gone, and I'm realizing that she might have been the only reason I was tolerated at all." "That's not true," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a man who had never once defended me to his family, who had never acknowledged that their treatment of me was problematic, who had always chosen the path of least resistance rather than standing up for his wife. "I'm going to bed," I said, leaving him alone with his takeout and his phone. The night before the funeral, I lay awake thinking about Elena and all the conversations we'd had over the years. I remembered the time she told me about leaving Mexico as a young woman, how scared she had been, but how determined she was to build a better life for her future family. "Sometimes you have to be brave, even when you don't feel brave," she had said, "especially when you don't feel brave." I thought about the advice she'd given me about marriage, about being kind and listening with your heart. I wondered if she knew how unhappy I had become, how disconnected David and I had grown from each other. I suspected she did. Elena saw everything. I also thought about the last conversation we'd had just 2 weeks before she died. I had stopped by her house on a Saturday afternoon to drop off some photos I'd printed from our last coffee date. She was in her garden, as always, wearing her favorite wide-brimmed hat and the gardening gloves I'd given her for her birthday. "Sarah, mija," she had called out when she saw me walking up the path. "Perfect timing. Come see what's blooming." She showed me her latest rose varieties, explaining how she'd grafted different stems together to create new colors. Elena was always experimenting, always learning, always growing something beautiful. "You know," she said as we sat on her bench, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." "Good things, I hope," I said, smiling. "Always good things, but also worried things." "Worried about what?" Elena took my hand in both of hers, the way she had the first day we met. "You seem sad lately, mija. Different, like you're carrying a heavy burden." I had started to deflect, to give her the same answer I gave everyone when they asked how I was doing. "Fine, just busy with work." But something in her expression stopped me. "I am sad," I admitted. "I feel like I'm disappearing, Elena, like I'm becoming someone I don't recognize." "Tell me." So I did. I told her about feeling invisible in her family, about David's increasing distance, about wondering if this was what the rest of my life was going to look like. Elena listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her eyes never leaving my face. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. I'm scared of making the wrong choice." "The wrong choice," Elena repeated thoughtfully. "Let me tell you something, mija. The only wrong choice is the one that makes you smaller, that dims your light. You are too bright, too full of life to spend your days feeling invisible." "But what about family? What about commitment?" "Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Commitment means fighting for something worth fighting for. But first, you have to commit to yourself, to your own happiness." She squeezed my hand. "Promise me something, Sarah. Promise me that you won't disappear. The world needs your light." I had promised, though I wasn't sure I believed I could keep that promise. Now, lying in bed the night before her funeral, Her words echoed in my mind. Don't disappear. The world needs your light. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of Colorado weather that makes the mountains disappear behind low-hanging clouds. I dressed carefully for the funeral, choosing a simple black dress and the pearl necklace Elena had given me for my last birthday. "You look nice," David said as we got ready to leave for the church. "Thank you." We drove in silence through the suburbs of Aurora to St. Catherine's Catholic Church, where Elena had attended Mass every Sunday for the past 30 years. The parking lot was already full when we arrived, and I was surprised by how many people had come to pay their respects. Inside the church, I was struck by the beauty of the flower arrangements. White roses and lilies, with touches of the deep red roses that Elena had loved so much. Her casket was closed, surrounded by photographs from different stages of her life. As a young bride, holding her baby son Roberto, gardening, celebrating holidays with family. David and I found seats in the third row, behind Roberto, Carmen, and Maria. I noticed that several of Elena's neighbors were there, along with people from her church, some former co-workers from the factory where she'd worked for 20 years, and relatives I recognized from family gatherings. The service was conducted in both English and Spanish, honoring Elena's heritage and the bilingual family she had raised. Father Miguel, who had known Elena since she first started attending St. Catherine's, spoke about her generosity, her faith, and her devotion to family. Elena Martinez lived her life with an open heart, he said. She welcomed everyone, family, friends, neighbors, strangers, with the same warmth and love. She believed that we are all connected, that we are all part of one human family. I thought about how true those words were. Elena had never made me feel like an outsider the way the rest of David's family had. She had seen me as part of her family from the very beginning. Several people got up to share memories. Roberto spoke about his mother's strength and determination. Maria talked about her grandmother's cooking and her insistence on celebrating every birthday, no matter how small. A neighbor shared a story about Elena helping her through a difficult divorce, bringing food and offering to babysit her children. I had hoped David might speak, or that someone might mention Elena's garden, her love of roses, the way she made everyone feel special. But as the service progressed, I realized that some of the most important parts of Elena's life, her curiosity about the world, her genuine interest in other people, her ability to make anyone feel valued, weren't being talked about. When Father Miguel asked if anyone else would like to share a memory, I felt an urge to stand up, to tell everyone about the Elena I knew. But I looked around at David's family, sitting stiffly in their pews, and I lost my nerve. This wasn't my place, I told myself. I was just the in-law. After the church service, we drove to Crown Hill Cemetery for the burial. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, creating a somber atmosphere as we gathered around Elena's gravesite. The cemetery was beautiful in its own way, with mature trees and well-maintained grounds, nestled against the foothills with a view of the mountains in the distance. I stood next to David, watching as Elena's casket was lowered into the ground. Father Miguel said final prayers, and family members took turns dropping handfuls of dirt onto the casket. When it was my turn, I whispered, "Gracias, Elena," and let the dirt fall from my fingers. As we walked back to our cars, I overheard Carmen talking to one of Elena's sisters about the reception. "We're keeping it small," Carmen was saying. "Just immediate family at the house." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The reception was just immediate family? What did that make me? "David," I said quietly as we reached our car, "did you know the reception was only for immediate family?" He looked confused. "What are you talking about? Your mother just told your aunt that the reception is only for immediate family. Are we not going?" David's face flushed. "Of course we're going. You're my wife. Then why did your mother say immediate family only?" "I'm sure she just meant..." "I don't know what she meant. Let's just go to the house." But as we drove to Roberto and Carmen's house, I had a sinking feeling that Carmen had meant exactly what she said. When we arrived at Roberto and Carmen's house, cars were already lining the street. The same house where I'd first met Elena 8 years ago, with its perfect lawn and magazine-worthy landscaping, now seemed like a fortress I wasn't sure I was allowed to enter. David parked behind Maria's SUV, and we walked up the familiar pathway to the front door. I could hear voices coming from inside, the low murmur of conversation that accompanies gatherings like this, where grief and relief mix together in complex ways. Carmen answered the door, dressed in a black suit that looked expensive and perfectly pressed, despite the day's events. Her makeup was flawless, her graying hair styled in a way that suggested she'd made a salon appointment specifically for her mother-in-law's funeral. "David, mijo," she said, embracing her son warmly. Then she looked at me, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, I'm so sorry for your loss, Carmen," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Thank you," she replied, already looking past me toward other arriving guests. We followed her into the living room, where about 20 people were gathered. The formal dining table had been extended and covered with food, casseroles, salads, desserts, and coffee. It was the same spread that appeared at every Martinez family gathering, the same dishes prepared by the same women, served on the same plates that Carmen had registered for when she got married 35 years ago. I recognized most of the faces: Roberto's brother Miguel and his wife Rosa, Maria's husband Tony and their 2 teenage kids, Elena's sister Esperanza and her adult children, plus several neighbors and family friends. Everyone was speaking in a mixture of English and Spanish, sharing stories about Elena, offering comfort to Roberto and Carmen. David immediately gravitated toward his uncle Miguel, and they began talking about work, the stock market, sports, anything except the woman they'd just buried. I stood there for a moment, unsure of where to fit into this gathering. "Sarah!" I heard my name called, and turned to see Elena's sister Esperanza approaching with open arms. "Mija, how are you holding up?" Esperanza looked so much like Elena that seeing her made my throat tighten with emotion. She had the same warm eyes, the same genuine smile, the same way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. "I'm okay, Tia," I said, using the Spanish term for aunt that Elena had taught me. "It's been a difficult week." "She loved you so much," Esperanza said, taking my hands just as Elena used to do. "You brought her so much joy. She talked about you all the time." "She talked about me?" "Oh, yes. About your job, your travels with David, your conversations. She was so proud of you. She used to say you were the daughter she never had." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Elena had never told me she felt that way, but hearing it from Esperanza felt like receiving one last gift from my grandmother-in-law. "She was proud of you too, you know," Esperanza continued. "The way you handled yourself in this family. The way you always tried to bridge differences and include everyone. She noticed everything." We talked for a few more minutes about Elena's garden, her recipes, her stubborn insistence on driving long after she probably should have stopped. Then Esperanza was called away by one of her children, and I found myself standing alone again. I looked around the room and realized something that made my stomach drop. No one was talking to me. David was still deep in conversation with his uncle. Roberto was holding court near the fireplace, telling stories about Elena's early years in Denver. Carmen and Maria were in the kitchen, orchestrating the food service with military precision. Other family members were clustered in small groups, sharing memories and catching up on each other's lives. But no one approached me. No one asked how I was doing. No one invited me into their conversations. It was as if I was invisible, a ghost at my own grandmother-in-law's funeral reception. I walked over to where David was standing, hoping to join his conversation with Miguel and Miguel's son, Carlos. "And the market's been so volatile lately," Miguel was saying. "I keep telling my clients to diversify, but they want everything in tech stocks." "Tell me about it," David replied. "I have one client who wants to put his entire retirement fund into cryptocurrency." Carlos laughed. "Remember when Dad wanted to invest in that ostrich farm?" The 3 men chuckled at what was clearly a family joke. I stood there smiling, waiting for someone to acknowledge my presence or include me in the conversation. But they continued talking as if I wasn't there. After 5 minutes of being completely ignored, I touched David's arm. "I'm going to get some food," I said quietly. He nodded absently, not breaking his conversation. "Okay, honey." I walked to the dining room and served myself small portions of food I wasn't hungry for. The tamales that Elena's sister had made, the rice and beans that were Carmen's specialty, the tres leches cake that reminded me of all those coffee dates with Elena. I found a seat at the kitchen island, thinking someone might join me. Instead, I watched as other people filled their plates and formed natural groups throughout the house. I ate slowly, hoping the meal might give me something to do with my hands, some reason to stay busy while I figured out how to navigate this social minefield. "The food is wonderful," I said to Carmen when she passed by with another casserole dish. "Rosa made most of it," Carmen replied, not slowing down. "Not "Thank you for coming," or "How are you holding up?" or "Elena would have loved seeing everyone together." Just a factual statement that made it clear she hadn't prepared the food and wasn't particularly interested in discussing it with me. I finished eating and looked for David, thinking maybe we could leave soon. I found him on the back patio with several of the men, smoking cigars and drinking beer. Through the sliding glass doors, I could see them laughing about something. David looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. In the living room, Carmen was showing Elena's photo albums to a group of women. They were looking at pictures from Elena's childhood in Mexico, her wedding, Roberto's baptism, family vacations from the 1980s. "Oh, look at this one," Carmen said, pointing to a photo of Elena in her garden. She was so proud of those roses. I approached the group, thinking this might be my opportunity to share my own memories of Elena's garden, all the Saturday afternoons we'd spent talking among the rose bushes. "She taught me so much about roses," I began, but Carmen was already turning the page. "And here's Roberto's graduation from college," she continued, completely ignoring my comment. Elena was so proud that day. The other women murmured appreciatively, asking questions about Roberto's education and career. I stood behind the group, looking over their shoulders at the photographs, but no one made room for me to sit down. No one asked for my input about the images. After a few minutes, I gave up and walked to Elena's garden, visible through the kitchen window. Someone, probably Roberto, had already cleaned up the area where she'd collapsed, but her roses were still blooming beautifully. Red, pink, white, and yellow blooms covered the bushes she'd tended so lovingly. I stood at the window, remembering all the conversations Elena and I had shared in that garden. She had taught me the names of different rose varieties, shown me how to deadhead the spent blooms, explained how she'd learned to graft different stems together to create unique colors. "She spent so much time out there," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Maria approaching with a cup of coffee. "She loved those roses," I replied, hoping this might be the start of a real conversation with my sister-in-law. "Mom thinks we should hire someone to maintain the garden," Maria continued. "It's too much work for Dad, and none of us have the time." "I could help," I offered. "Elena taught me a lot about rose care. I'd be happy to." "That's sweet," Maria interrupted. "But we'll probably just hire professionals." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone at the window again. The afternoon dragged on. I tried multiple times to insert myself into conversations, but each attempt was met with polite indifference or subtle exclusion. When I approached a group discussing Elena's recipes, they would acknowledge my presence with brief smiles and then continue their conversation as if I hadn't spoken. When I offered to help clean up, Carmen assured me they had everything under control. Even the children seemed to have absorbed the family's attitude toward me. Maria's teenagers, whom I'd watched grow up over the past 8 years, barely made eye contact when I asked about school and sports. By 4 o'clock, I was emotionally exhausted. I felt like I'd spent the day trying to force myself into spaces where I wasn't wanted, attempting to mourn a woman I'd loved alongside people who seemed determined to pretend I didn't exist. I found David still on the patio with the men. He was telling a story about a difficult client, gesturing with his beer bottle, completely absorbed in the conversation. "David," I said, interrupting him mid-sentence. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked annoyed at being interrupted. "Can it wait? We're in the middle of—" "Please," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's important." He excused himself and followed me inside, where we stood in the hallway between the living room and kitchen. "What's wrong?" he asked, clearly irritated. "I want to leave." "Leave? We just got here." "David, we've been here for 3 hours, and in those 3 hours, exactly one person has had a meaningful conversation with me. Everyone else has either ignored me completely or treated me like an unwelcome stranger." "You're being dramatic," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Have you noticed anyone trying to include me in their conversations? Have you seen anyone ask me about my memories of Elena or how I'm handling her death?" David looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. I could tell he was starting to realize that what I was saying might be true. "Maybe they're just dealing with their own grief," he offered weakly. "Your family has never made me feel welcome, David. Never. And today, at Elena's funeral, they've made it crystal clear that they don't consider me part of this family. That's not. Your mother said the reception was for immediate family only. When we arrived, no one greeted me except your great-aunt Esperanza. I've been standing around for 3 hours trying to participate in conversations about a woman I loved, and everyone acts like I don't exist. David was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing what I was saying, maybe finally acknowledging something he'd been willfully ignoring for years. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "I want you to see what's happening. I want you to acknowledge that your family treats me poorly, and I want to leave. If we leave now, it'll look bad." "To who? The people who've been ignoring me all afternoon?" David rubbed his forehead, a gesture I recognized as his way of buying time when he didn't know what to say. "Fine," he said finally. "Let me just say goodbye to my uncle. I'll wait in the car." I walked outside and sat in our car, looking back at the house where Elena's family was celebrating her life without any meaningful acknowledgement of my relationship with her. Through the windows, I could see people laughing, embracing, sharing stories. It looked warm and loving and exactly like the kind of family gathering Elena would have wanted, except I wasn't really part of it. David emerged from the house 10 minutes later, looking frustrated and uncomfortable. "Everyone thinks you're being rude," he said as he started the car. "Everyone thinks I'm being rude? My mother asked where you went. When I said you wanted to leave, she said it was disrespectful to Elena's memory." I felt anger flare in my chest. Disrespectful to Elena's memory? I'm the one who called her every week, David. I'm the one who drove her to doctor's appointments when no one else could. I'm the one who spent Saturday afternoons in her garden, listening to her stories and learning about her life. How is it disrespectful for me to leave a gathering where no one will even talk to me? "You know how my family is?" "Yes, I do know how your family is." That's exactly the problem. We drove home in tense silence. I stared out the window at the familiar neighborhoods of Aurora, thinking about how I'd spent 8 years trying to fit into a family that had never wanted me to fit in. When we got home, David immediately turned on the television and opened a beer. I went to our bedroom and changed out of my funeral clothes, hanging up the black dress and carefully placing Elena's pearl necklace in my jewelry box. That evening, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Esperanza had said. She was so proud of you. She used to say you were the daughter she never had. Elena had seen me as family, even when her own family didn't. She had valued my thoughts, my feelings, my presence in her life, and now she was gone, and I was left with people who had made it clear that they didn't consider me one of them. I thought about Elena's advice. Don't disappear. The world needs your light. But how could I keep my light burning when the people around me seemed determined to extinguish it? The next morning, David left early for work without saying much about the previous day. I called in sick, something I rarely did, and spent the day trying to process everything that had happened. I kept thinking about the reception, replaying conversations and interactions, wondering if I was being overly sensitive or if my feelings were justified. I thought about 8 years of family gatherings where I'd felt like an outsider, 8 years of trying to prove myself worthy of acceptance, 8 years of David making excuses for his family's behavior instead of defending me. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Esperanza. "Sarah, mija, how are you today?" "I'm okay, Tia. How are you? I wanted to call because I was worried about you yesterday. You seemed sad during the reception. I was surprised that someone had noticed. It was a difficult day." "I know, sweetheart, and I want you to know that Elena would be very upset if she knew how you were treated yesterday." My voice caught in my throat. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed. I watched you try to join conversations. I saw you standing alone. I noticed how no one included you in the photo albums or the storytelling. It wasn't right, mija." Tears started flowing down my cheeks. Finally, someone was acknowledging what I'd experienced. "Elena loved you like a daughter," Esperanza continued. "She used to call me every week, and you know what she talked about most? You. Your job, your kindness, your strength. She was so proud to have you in the family. I don't think the rest of the family sees it that way." "No, they don't. And that's their loss, Sarah. But it's also their shame." We talked for another 20 minutes. Esperanza shared more stories about Elena's feelings toward me, how she'd defended me when Carmen made critical comments, how she'd worried about my happiness in the marriage. "She wanted to talk to you about something important," Esperanza said near the end of our conversation. "She mentioned it the last time we spoke, maybe 2 weeks ago. She said she had something she wanted to give you, something special." "What kind of something?" "I don't know, mija. She was being mysterious about it, but she seemed excited, like she'd made an important decision." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about this revelation. Elena had wanted to give me something? I wondered what it could have been and whether I'd ever know now that she was gone. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to Elena's house. I had a key. Elena had given it to me 2 years ago after she'd locked herself out and had to call a locksmith. "Keep this, mija," she'd said, "just in case I do something foolish again." I'd never used the key for anything other than the few times Elena had asked me to check on her house when she traveled to visit relatives in California. But now, sitting in my car outside her small bungalow in Aurora, I felt drawn to the space where she'd lived, where we'd shared so many conversations. The house looked exactly the same as it had the last time I'd visited. Elena's red Honda Civic was still in the driveway. Her garden still bloomed with late-season roses, and the decorative flag with sunflowers still hung by her front door. I used the key to let myself in, calling out, "Hello," even though I knew no one was there. The house smelled like Elena, a mixture of the vanilla candles she loved and the herbal tea she drank every afternoon. Nothing had been disturbed since her death. Her coffee cup was still in the sink. Her reading glasses were on the kitchen table, next to a mystery novel she'd never finish, and her gardening shoes were by the back door, still caked with soil from her final morning in the garden. I walked through the house slowly, remembering all the times I'd been there. The living room where Elena and I had watched novellas together while she taught me Spanish phrases. The kitchen where she'd shown me how to make her famous enchiladas. The sunroom where she kept her plants during the winter months. In her bedroom, I noticed that her jewelry box was sitting open on the dresser. Elena had always been proud of her jewelry collection, not because the pieces were particularly valuable, but because each one had a story. There were earrings from her mother, a bracelet from her wedding day, a necklace Roberto had given her when he got his first job, rings that had belonged to her grandmother in Mexico. As I looked at the jewelry box, I remembered what Esperanza had said about Elena wanting to give me something special. I wondered if it might have been a piece of jewelry. I was about to close the jewelry box when I noticed a small envelope tucked behind the mirror. My name was written on it in Elena's careful handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and pulled out a note written on Elena's personal stationery, cream-colored paper with small roses printed along the border. "My dearest Sarah," the note began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and I hope it means you have found this letter as I intended. I have been thinking for many weeks about what I want to leave to the people I love most, and I realized that there are things I want to say to you that I never said while I was alive. You have brought more joy to my life than you will ever know. From the first day David brought you to meet us, I saw something special in you, a kindness, a strength, a beautiful spirit that reminded me of myself when I was young and full of dreams. I know that my family has not always treated you as they should. I see more than they think I see, and I hear more than they think I hear. It breaks my heart that you have tried so hard to belong in a family that has been too stubborn and too set in their ways to appreciate the gift you are. I want you to know that you have been the daughter I never had. Your visits, our coffee dates, our conversations in the garden, these have been some of the happiest moments of my later years. You listened to my stories. You cared about my opinions. You made me feel valued and loved in a way that reminded me who I am, beyond just being someone's mother and grandmother. I am leaving you my jewelry collection, Sarah. Not because it is worth a lot of money, but because each piece has a story. And I want those stories to continue with someone who will treasure them. I want you to wear my mother's earrings and remember that you are strong. I want you to wear my wedding ring and remember that love should lift you up, not tear you down. I want you to wear my grandmother's necklace and remember that you come from a long line of brave women, even if that line isn't connected by blood. Most importantly, I want you to remember what I told you in the garden. Don't disappear. Don't let anyone make you smaller. Don't spend your life trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You deserve to be loved fully, respected completely, and valued exactly as you are. If the people around you cannot see your worth, that is their blindness, not your failure. Be brave, Micha. Choose happiness, even when it's scary. Choose yourself, even when others don't choose you. All my love, Elena P.S. The jewelry box has a secret compartment at the bottom. Press the small rose carved into the back right corner. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Elena had known. She had seen how her family treated me, and she had wanted me to have something that would remind me of my own worth. I followed her instructions and pressed the small carved rose. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a small velvet bag. Inside was a ring I'd never seen before, a simple gold band with a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. There was another note, smaller this time. This was my engagement ring from my first love, before I met David's grandfather. I was 17, and he was killed in an accident before we could marry. I kept this ring as a reminder that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important love is the love we have for ourselves. Wear it when you need to remember that you are enough, exactly as you are. I slipped the ring onto my right hand and looked at myself in Elena's mirror. For the first time in days, I didn't see a woman who was trying too hard to fit in. I saw someone who had been loved and valued by an extraordinary person, someone who had stories to carry forward, someone who deserved better than what she'd been accepting. I carefully packed Elena's entire jewelry collection into a small suitcase I found in her closet. Each piece felt like a treasure, not because of its monetary value, but because of the love and intention behind Elena's gift. As I was preparing to leave, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw Carmen's silver Mercedes parked behind my car, and Carmen herself walking up the front path with a determined expression. My heart started racing. I hadn't expected anyone to come to Elena's house so soon after the funeral, and I definitely hadn't expected to be caught here with a suitcase full of jewelry. Carmen used her own key to enter the house and called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" "It's me, Carmen," I replied, walking into the living room with the suitcase in my hand. Carmen's eyes immediately went to the suitcase, then to the jewelry box I'd left open on the dresser, visible through the bedroom doorway. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" Her voice was cold and suspicious. "Elena left me something," I said, holding up the letter. Carmen snatched the letter from my hand and read it quickly, her expression growing more and more angry. "This is ridiculous," she said when she finished reading. "Elena was obviously not thinking clearly when she wrote this. She can't just give away valuable family jewelry to what, Carmen? To someone who isn't really family? That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant. It's what you've meant every day for the past 8 years. Carmen looked at the suitcase again. "Those pieces have been in our family for generations. Roberto should decide what happens to them." Elena already decided. This letter is dated 2 weeks ago. She was completely lucid when she wrote it. "You can't just come into her house and take whatever you want." I felt something snap inside me. All the years of being polite, of biting my tongue, of trying to prove myself worthy of basic respect, it all came rushing to the surface. "I'm not taking whatever I want, Carmen. I'm taking what Elena specifically left for me. The woman who treated me like family when no one else would. The woman who saw my worth when her own daughter-in-law spent 8 years making it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son." Carmen's face flushed. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Tell the truth?" Elena knew exactly how this family treated me. She saw it, she understood it, and she wanted to make sure I knew that someone valued me. Elena was sentimental. She didn't understand the complexity of family dynamics. Elena understood family dynamics perfectly. She understood that family is supposed to love and support each other. She understood that I've spent 8 years trying to earn acceptance from people who were never going to give it to me. Carmen crossed her arms. "If you take that jewelry, Roberto will call the police. Let him call the police. I have Elena's letter, written in her own handwriting, clearly stating her intentions. I have the key she gave me to this house. I have 8 years of witnesses who can testify to our relationship." For the first time since I'd known her, Carmen looked uncertain. "Besides," I continued, "do you really want to explain to the police why you're so determined to prevent Elena's wishes from being honored? Do you want to tell them how you excluded me from funeral planning, ignored me at the reception, and are now trying to steal back a gift that Elena specifically intended for me?" Carmen was quiet for a long moment. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if she had any legal standing to prevent me from taking the jewelry. "Elena loved you," she said finally, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "But she loved this family too. That jewelry, some of those pieces came from Mexico with her. They're part of our heritage. And now they're part of mine. Because Elena chose to share that heritage with me. Because she saw me as her daughter, even when the rest of you saw me as an outsider." I walked toward the door, then turned back to face Carmen. "You know what's sad? Elena spent the last years of her life watching her family exclude the person she considered a daughter. She died knowing that after she was gone, I'd have no one in this family who truly valued me. That must have broken her heart. Carmen didn't respond, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. I left Elena's house and drove home, the suitcase full of jewelry in my passenger seat. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe fully. That evening, David came home from work to find me sitting at our kitchen table, wearing Elena's emerald ring and examining each piece of jewelry with a magnifying glass I'd borrowed from his desk. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie and looking at the array of necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and rings spread across our table. "Elena's jewelry collection." She left it to me. David sat down across from me, picking up the letter Elena had written. I watched his face as he read it, seeing surprise, confusion, and something that might have been guilt pass across his features. "She really wrote this?" he asked when he finished. 2 weeks ago. She'd been planning this, David. She knew she wanted me to have these pieces. He picked up a delicate gold bracelet, examining the intricate filigree work. "Some of these look really old." Elena told me stories about most of them. This bracelet was her mother's. "These earrings were a gift from her grandmother. This necklace was from her quinceañera in Mexico." David was quiet for a moment, still holding the bracelet. "My mother called me at work today. She was upset, I can imagine. She said you took jewelry from Elena's house without permission." "I had permission. Elena's letter is permission. The key she gave me is permission. The relationship we built over 8 years is permission. Sarah, I know my family hasn't always..." "Stop." I looked up from the ring I'd been examining. "Just stop, David. Don't tell me they haven't always been perfect, or that they mean well, or that they're just set in their ways. Your grandmother saw exactly how they treated me, and she was heartbroken by it." David looked down at the bracelet in his hands. "What did my mother say to you at Elena's house?" "She threatened to have your father call the police. She said the jewelry was too valuable for family heritage to be given to someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Someone who isn't really family, according to her." David was quiet for a long time. I could see him processing not just the events of the day, but years of family dynamics he'd chosen to ignore. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should have said something. All these years, I should have defended you. Why didn't you?" "I don't know. It was easier to pretend it wasn't happening. It was easier to think you were being too sensitive than to acknowledge that my family was treating you poorly." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw someone who had taken the path of least resistance for so long that he'd forgotten how to stand up for anything, including his own wife. "It wasn't easier for me, David. I know. I'm sorry." But his apology felt hollow, too little and too late. Elena was dead, and I'd spent 8 years feeling like an outsider in my own marriage because David had never been willing to set boundaries with his family. Over the next few days, I researched each piece of jewelry, trying to understand its history and value. What I discovered amazed me. Many of Elena's pieces were genuinely valuable, not just sentimentally, but monetarily. The emerald ring Elena had called her first love ring was actually worth several $1,000s. A pearl necklace had been appraised years earlier at $3,500. Several of the gold pieces were antiques with significant value to collectors. But more than their monetary worth, I was struck by the stories embedded in each piece. Elena had carefully preserved jewelry from multiple generations of women in her family: her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother. She had also acquired pieces throughout her own life that marked important moments: her first job in America, Roberto's graduation, special anniversaries. By giving me this collection, Elena had entrusted me with the material history of her family's women. She had made me the keeper of their stories. I spent hours online, researching the origins of different pieces, learning about the techniques used to create vintage Mexican jewelry, understanding the significance of various gemstones and metals. It felt like taking a masterclass in Elena's heritage, and I found myself wishing I could call her to ask questions about pieces whose stories I didn't fully understand. One afternoon, while David was at work, I decided to visit a local jewelry appraiser to get a professional assessment of the collection. I chose a small shop in downtown Denver that specialized in vintage and estate jewelry, thinking they would have the expertise to properly evaluate Elena's pieces. The shop was called Heirloom Jewelry, and it was exactly the kind of place Elena would have loved, filled with beautiful old pieces, run by a woman who clearly respected the history and craftsmanship of vintage jewelry. "What a remarkable collection," said Margaret, the shop's owner, as I spread Elena's jewelry across her examination table. These pieces span several decades, and the quality is exceptional. Margaret examined each piece carefully, using professional tools to assess the metals, stones, and construction. She asked questions about their provenance, and I shared what I knew about Elena's family history and her journey from Mexico to Colorado. "This collection tells a beautiful story," Margaret said when she finished her examination. "You have pieces here that date back to the 1920s, possibly earlier. The craftsmanship on some of these Mexican pieces is extraordinary. Hand-engraved details that you simply don't see in modern jewelry." She handed me a written appraisal that made my eyes widen. The total value of Elena's collection was over $25,000. "Are you sure?" I asked, looking at the numbers again. "Conservative estimate," Margaret replied. "Some of these pieces are quite rare. This emerald ring, for instance, is a stunning example of 1940s Mexican jewelry design. And this pearl necklace is graduated cultured pearls with a platinum clasp, very high quality." I drove home in a daze, clutching the appraisal report. Elena had left me something far more valuable than I'd realized, but the monetary value seemed almost beside the point. She had entrusted me with her family's legacy, with stories and memories that were priceless. That evening, I showed David the appraisal report. $25,000? He looked at the paper in disbelief. Elena had jewelry worth $25,000? She collected pieces over her entire lifetime. Some were gifts, some were inherited, some she bought herself to commemorate important events. My parents are going to lose their minds when they find out how valuable this stuff is. This stuff? David, these aren't just random valuables. Each piece has a story, a history. Elena entrusted me with her family's heritage. I know, but $25,000. That's a lot of money, Sarah. I looked at my husband and realized we were having two completely different conversations. He was seeing dollar signs, while I was seeing the weight of Elena's trust and love. "The money isn't the point," I said. "It kind of is, though. My parents are going to argue that Elena didn't understand the value of what she was giving away. Elena understood exactly what she was giving away. She was giving me the stories of the women in her family. She was making me the keeper of their memories." But I could see in David's expression that he didn't really understand what I meant. To him, the jewelry was an asset, an inheritance, a financial consideration. He couldn't see what Elena had seen, that I was the right person to carry these stories forward. The next day, Roberto called David at work. When David came home that evening, he looked stressed and uncomfortable. "My dad wants to meet with us," he said, "about the jewelry." "What kind of meeting?" "He's talked to a lawyer. He thinks there might be grounds to contest Elena's wishes." I felt my stomach drop. Contest them how? Undue influence, maybe. Or he might argue that Elena wasn't competent when she wrote the letter. Elena was completely competent 2 weeks ago, David. You know that. I know that. But my dad is really upset about this. He says some of those pieces belong to his mother and they should stay in the family. I am family. Or at least, Elena thought I was. David sat down heavily in his chair. "Would you consider maybe keeping some of the pieces and giving others back? As a compromise?" I stared at my husband in disbelief. Elena specifically chose to give me this collection. She wrote a letter explaining her reasons. She hid it in a secret compartment so I would find it after her death. And you want me to compromise? I just think maybe there's a way to honor Elena's wishes while also respecting my family's feelings. Your family's feelings? What about Elena's feelings? What about my feelings? Sarah, please, let's just meet with them and see what they have to say. I realized in that moment that David was never going to defend me, even when I was legally and morally in the right. Even when his beloved grandmother had explicitly stated her wishes, he was more concerned about keeping peace with his parents than supporting his wife. "Fine," I said. "We'll meet with them. But I'm not giving back Elena's jewelry, David. She left it to me for a reason." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Roberto and Carmen's house. I spent Friday evening preparing, reading Elena's letter multiple times, researching inheritance law, and gathering documentation of my relationship with Elena, photos from our coffee dates, thank you cards she'd sent me, the spare key she'd given me. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress and Elena's pearl necklace. If Roberto and Carmen were going to challenge Elena's gift, I wanted them to see me wearing it. David and I drove to their house in tense silence. I could tell he was hoping I would agree to some kind of compromise, while I was determined to honor Elena's wishes exactly as she'd written them. Roberto, Carmen, and Maria were waiting for us in the formal living room, the same room where Elena's photos had been displayed during the reception. They had arranged chairs in a circle, as if this were a business meeting rather than a family discussion. "Thank you for coming," Roberto said stiffly. He looked older than he had at the funeral, more fragile. Grief had aged him in the past week. "Of course," David replied. "We want to work this out." I noticed he said "we," though I had made no such commitment. Roberto cleared his throat. "Sarah, I want you to know that we appreciate the relationship you had with Elena. She cared about you very much." "Thank you," I said, waiting for the "but" I knew was coming. "But we believe she may not have fully understood the value of the jewelry she was giving away. Some of those pieces have been in our family for 4 generations. They represent our heritage, our connection to Mexico, our family history." "Elena understood exactly what she was giving away," I replied. "She wrote about it in her letter. She wanted me to have the stories that go with each piece." Carmen leaned forward. "With all due respect, Sarah, you're not Mexican. You don't share our cultural heritage. Those pieces belong with people who can appreciate their true significance." I felt anger flare in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. Elena taught me about every piece in that collection. She shared the stories, the cultural significance, the family history. She made me the keeper of those stories because she trusted me to honor them. "But you're not blood family," Maria added. "When you and David divorce..." "When we divorce?" I looked at David, who was staring at his hands. "Is that what this is about? You're planning for my divorce?" "Not planning," Roberto said quickly. "But statistics show that many marriages end in divorce. If that happens, our family jewelry would end up with someone who has no connection to our family at all. So you want the jewelry back as an insurance policy against my potential divorce?" "We want the jewelry to stay in the family where it belongs," Carmen said firmly. I took out Elena's letter and read it aloud, emphasizing the parts where she explicitly stated her reasons for giving me the collection. When I finished, the room was quiet. "Elena made her choice," I said. "She chose me to carry on the stories of the women in your family. She did that because she saw me as her daughter, even when the rest of you saw me as an outsider." "This isn't about seeing you as an outsider," Roberto said. "This is about family heritage." "No, this is exactly about seeing me as an outsider." Elena knew that. She wrote about it in her letter. She knew you would react this way, which is why she hid the letter and the jewelry where you wouldn't find them. David finally spoke up. "Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. Sarah could keep some pieces, and others could stay with the family." I turned to look at my husband, and something inside me broke. After everything, Elena's death, the funeral reception where I was ignored, his family's refusal to accept me, and now their attempt to override Elena's explicit wishes, David was still trying to find a compromise that would make his parents happy at my expense. "No," I said firmly. "Elena left me her jewelry collection because she wanted me to have it. I'm not negotiating away a gift from a woman who loved me." "Sarah, please," Carmen said. "Be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." Elena was reasonable when she made this decision. You're the ones being unreasonable by trying to override the wishes of a dead woman. Roberto's face was getting red. "That jewelry is worth a significant amount of money. I know exactly what it's worth." I had it appraised. The room went silent. I could see the shock on their faces as they realized the collection was more valuable than they'd thought. "How much?" Maria asked. "That's not really your business," I replied. "But it's enough that Elena knew she was making a significant gift, which makes your claim that she didn't understand the value completely false." Roberto stood up. "I want you to know that we've consulted with an attorney. We have legal options." "So do I said, standing as well. "Elena's letter is legally valid. I have documentation of our relationship going back 8 years. I have witnesses who can testify to her mental competence. And I have the key she gave me to her house, which demonstrates the level of trust she placed in me." I walked toward the door, then turned back to face the family. "You know what's really sad about this? Elena spent the last years of her life watching you treat me like I didn't belong. She died knowing that her own family would probably try to take back the one thing she could give me to show how much she valued me. She was right about all of it." David caught up with me at the car. "Sarah, wait. Wait for what? For you to finally defend me? For your family to suddenly decide I'm worthy of basic respect?" I'm done waiting, David. What does that mean? I looked at my husband, this man I'd been married to for 8 years, who had never once stood up for me when it mattered. It means Elena was right about more than just the jewelry. She was right about everything.